Okay, thanks for coming to my talk here. So that was actually a great introduction to what I'm going to be talking about, because I am talking about continuous integration for mobile, which we really do aim to compress the iteration cycle as much as we possibly can, and also to enable teams to be autonomous and build features and ship features on their own schedule. So I work for Lyft. My name is Sebastian, by the way. I work for Lyft, which is, we don't do business in Germany right now. Maybe one day down the line we will. We're a ride-sharing company. We have one big competitor in the US, which is Uber. We are based out of San Francisco. Today we are the only other player on the market in America. We are currently maybe 300, 350 engineers, and out of those about 40 work on mobile. I was working on the mobile team. I was leading the mobile team for the first 3 years of the company's history, and so I feel I have a lot to say in this field about continuous integration. So let's get started. So just to set the stage, this is from the latest iPhone event about 2 weeks ago. Tim Cook used Siri to request a Lyft ride using Siri. And this is quite exciting, and this is actually the second time we've been part of an Apple keynote. We like to work with them, and they like to work with us, and I think one of the things that they like is that we are very agile, and that we can ship these kinds of things with very short notice because we have built up a fundamental infrastructure and a process to ship the apps every week, which is basically what I spent 3 years of my life setting up. So continuous integration is kind of, I like this picture. You see this shape, the infinity symbol. There are like 100 different versions of it, and some of them use verbs, some use nouns, but basically it's talking about the same thing, how you plan, code, build, test, release, deploy, operate, and measure, and then you start over again. And getting to good continuous integration this has become kind of necessary for backend and web, and it's become quite easy because there are good tools out there. So apps and mobile make this a bit harder because the app is a problematic entity. And I'll talk about why that is. So specifically, I'm going to talk, of course, about how we do it at Lyft. And I think it applies to almost every app, because apps, to some extent, are very similar. And as I said, this is the entire Lyft organization when I joined in 2011. Very small. You can see my name up to the right there, so it just speaks to how small we were back then, and today, of course, we're pretty big. And this is, in fact, the entire team that built the first Lyft app. Actually, one guy is missing. And this was the first Lyft app in 2012. It's quite amazing how far we've gotten in 4 years. This looks like so old to me. You have all the shadings and gradients and multiple layers, and it's just very interesting how design has changed so much in mobile. Today, this is the app. If anything, it feels like it's smaller. It has fewer buttons, but of course we have like 15 times as many engineers as we did in the beginning. So it's funny how it takes more engineers to have fewer buttons, and that really is true. Like, removing complexity is so hard. So in 2016, yeah, as I said, we have 40 mobile developers. Definitely need more. If you're interested, talk to me, or if you know someone. We do iOS and Android, of course. Weekly releases to the app stores, and getting to that was like such an enormous amount of work, but it also opened up entire avenues, just as we heard in the previous talk about autonomous teams that can ship whenever they want to, and the need for compressed iterations, because shipping more often allows you just to iterate faster, and you definitely don't want the shipping process to be the limiting factor. And last week we also talked about the fact that we do 14 million rides per week, which is also like a mind-blowing number compared to what we did, of course, when we got started. I remember doing like 1,000 rides per week was like a big thing for us at one point. And today 14 million is mind-blowing. Okay, so continuous iteration on the app. So the app itself, we need to talk about why continuous integration for apps is hard. And it starts with the fact that the app is sort of a monolith. It's something that the user downloads. It's actually a zip file for both iOS and Android. It's just a zip file with a bunch of things in it. There's code, there's pictures, and well, I guess that's kind of it. Videos and stuff too as well. But it's something that the user downloads to their phone. And once they've downloaded it, they kind of have it, and you can't force them to upgrade it, and you can't in any way downgrade it. So if you ship bad code, there's definitely going to be a bunch of users that have that bad code, and you're going to have to live with that. So you can't really ship bad things. You can't afford to do that. It's also complicated because you have the App Store model where you have a middleman, so you don't even ship the app straight to the customer. You ship it to a middleman, and they in turn distribute it to the customer, which is quite convenient for the customers, but it's not ideal for you because you have someone in the middle. And also, the upgrade cycle is quite annoying, and I don't even know why both iOS and Android still notify you that like the Lyft app was updated again. And when you see that every week, I don't understand what that value is added to the customer, but that's still something that Apple and Google both do. Anyway, so continuous integration. We just take this infinity thing, and if you unroll it in a way that I think makes the most sense, starting with the planning, going through code, build, test, release, deploy, and operate and measure, I think this is a good way to analyze it and try to work on it. And in fact, what I feel you should do with this thing to try to figure out how to integrate it with your business is kind of do it backwards. At least when in terms of analyzing. Of course, when you build it up, you need each step in order to do the next. You can't distribute the app unless you're building it. You can't measure it unless you've distributed it. But in terms of analyzing how to optimize this process and how to iterate on it, it's kind of meta to iterate on your iteration cycle. I found it's very helpful to walk backwards. And so I couldn't actually get the text to be backwards. I made it upside down instead. Anyway, so you start at the end with operate and measure, go through the release and deploy, test, build, plan, and code. And for what I'm talking about here, we don't really care about a couple of those at the end. Sorry, in the beginning, the planning and the coding, that's a whole field by itself, figuring out how to plan and code. But the things I want to talk about here specifically is measure, release, test, and build. And that's, again, like what I spent so much time trying to figure out how to do properly. And you want to measure, of course, to guarantee quality. And ultimately, you're only iterating quickly to ensure you have a high-quality product out in the field. So unless you're measuring things, you don't even know what it is that you're shipping and what impact it has. And that actually, I guess, goes back to the OKRs again. We use OKRs at Lyft, for example, so we need to measure things. And then, of course, to be able to measure, you need to be able to release the app and see that you're iterating on it and improving on it. And to do that, you need to test, and to be able to test the app, of course, you need to build it. So let's talk about these. Measure. So today, this is commonly called observability, I think. We have a whole team that just works on observability at Lyft. And that covers all kinds of things. It's like business metrics and tech metrics and crash rates and performance and these kinds of things. This is just one random chart that I took from our system. We use Grafana. We built almost everything ourselves today in terms of how we do the measuring. There are good tools out there today that I would just recommend people use, at least when you're starting, like Mixpanel and Kissmetrics, and there's so many of them. But just getting good data on your apps, and this is broken down by app versions, and this is, for example, our app launch time, and it's sort of deliberately obfuscated here. We're showing way too much here just because I don't want to reveal numbers, because I haven't cleared that, but these are good examples of things that are useful to measure, both time things and quantitative things. So at the bottom, we're just showing how many of something that's happening. And getting the right metrics is really hard. And of course, this comes down to the autonomy of the teams. So like each team needs to be able to add the instrumentation that matters to their teams so that they can hit the goals that they want. Another thing, of course, is crash rates. We use Crashlytics. This is a tool from Twitter. There are many of them out there. Crashlytics is free. It's pretty good in that regard. We are evaluating other tools, but this is kind of table stakes today. Like you need to measure crash rates and quality because you don't know otherwise how your users are perceiving the app. And again, the tools are getting pretty good. So look at, like, we built a lot of stuff ourselves because we've been doing this now for 4 years. If you're starting today, definitely look at new tools. There are a lot of them out there. Now, releasing, that's a whole big bag of hurt, as Steve Jobs once said. Releasing for the App Store is hard, for iOS in particular. And releasing is also hard because the tools have been pretty bad. Apple and Google clearly are not using their own tools. The things that they ship aren't really enterprise grade. And also, at least a couple years ago, the whole interface for the app stores was clearly not designed for rapid iteration. They had like imagine a world where you ship the app once a month maybe, and that's not reality. So we ship a lot. So Lyft has 5 different versions of the app that's always out there, going from QA builds to alphas and betas and release candidates and production releases. And getting to this was super hard too, because especially with Apple, for example, getting signing certificates for all your engineers, for all these builds, and like managing all of this is actually really hard. I can talk a lot more about that in person if people have questions. It took us a lot of work to get here, so definitely it's worth investing in. And today there are good tools, like Shenzhen is a toolkit from, I think Twitter actually develops that now as well. So these things exist, and definitely investigate those things. In terms of how we release things, this is also something we have iterated on a lot. Today we do nightly alphas. We ship alpha builds to all of our engineers every night. And Lyft, we give credits to our employees to use the service, so you get some money you can ride for, but you can only use those if you use the alpha or beta. So that's a pretty good way to get your users to actually test the app. So we ship alphas every night, we ship betas every week, and we ship release candidates every week, and then production apps every week. So there's basically a 3-week delay now between when we cut out an alpha and when we ship the app ends up in the App Store. This is something we have sort of experimented our way to make sure we get high quality but still fast iteration. And this took us a super long time to get to, and I have a lot of war stories, I guess, to talk about that too, but we don't really have time for that today. So one more thing with releases, that releasing isn't necessarily just pushing out the apps. We use a lot of feature flags and A/B tests. We use a tool today called LeanPlum. There are a bunch of them. You don't even have to use a tool. I mean, a feature flag can just be a field in your database, for example. This is just a good way to run experiments. Being able to turn on and off features in people's apps is like super important. Firstly, because you can disable things that turn out to be buggy, and secondly, because there are many reasons why certain features shouldn't be available to some users. There are legal reasons in our industry because things matters a lot, like which city you're in, you can do certain things, other cities you can't. And also, just A/B testing is such a huge and important part today, to be able to see whether users respond better to one behavior or another one. So releasing is not just pushing out the binaries, the new apps, but it's also turning on things and off things. And keeping track of this is a bit of a nightmare. So we have a large release team today with like 4 release managers, I think, that work on specific versions of the app, and they keep track of the various flags and experiments we do, so that we know, for example, if a user had a crash, was that because they were in group A or group B, and these kinds of things. Of course, testing. This is such an enormous and hairy subject, and there's a lot of strong opinions around here. I've found that being pragmatic has been a good thing for us. We're not, so I love these pictures. These are the software testing ice cream cone anti-pattern and the ideal software testing pyramid. And so the left one, of course, has a ton of manual tests, some UI tests, some integration tests, a few unit tests, and in the pyramid you have like thousands of unit tests and maybe a few automated UI tests and just spot testing by manual testers. And I mean, I'd be lying if I said we were all the way at the pyramid, but we're definitely not in the ice cream cone anymore. And getting from ice cream cone to pyramid is an enormous project. Mobile automation is still not great, so testing things it's really hard to get this right. Tests break a lot, not because, partly because the app changes so much, partly because the tests are flaky in nature. And another thing is that the tools keep changing. So, for example, our iOS tests were broken for a couple of weeks when Xcode 8 came out, because they just changed things on us, and the tools hadn't really kept up. So in terms of the tools we use there, we use Appium to test the apps. It's one toolkit, there are many out there, it works for us. It's not perfect by any means, but we have made it work. And especially, we use it with Python, which is good because our backend is in Python, and this allows us to recycle tests from the server for our app tests. So Lyft is hard to test because it's a multiplayer game, effectively. You have drivers and passengers, and they have to communicate, and we need to have for example, many passengers and one driver, we don't want to test like 10 different phones against each other because that would be super slow, super flaky. So we have one phone and then a bunch of Python API robots, basically. And then finally, of course, build. So building rapidly and building everything all the time is very important. We use a lot of tools for that. So Travis CI, they're actually based here in Berlin. It's a great company. They provide build systems for mobile. Like building for mobile is hard because the environment, especially for iPhone, you require Macs. And there's just not a lot of knowledge in the industry on how you enterprise provision Mac servers and build on Macs. And the tools aren't even very good. Xcode leaves crust around, so you basically need to build on a fresh VM every time. And Travis CI provides this. They're great. Circle CI is a company in San Francisco, also doing kind of the same thing. We like them too. And we power everything with Jenkins just so that we get full control over the build pipeline. And Jenkins is not amazing, but it works. And this is something I think we're going to keep iterating on. We're definitely not done with this story. But getting to a system where at least you get the builds for every branch, for every flavor we have the 5 flavors, as I said, alpha, beta, release candidate, dev, and release. And building this enormous matrix is a lot of work. A couple of fun things. We try to use GitHub for the user interface for developers. So we use the check systems a lot. So you can see for this specific commit, there was the test passed, the top one, and it was deployed. The simulator was deployed actually for running the tests. And the linter ran, and the build was pushed to Travis CI. So this is, I mean, GitHub has become pretty good in terms of this. Even more so, we have another fun tool, which is something we call Submit Queue. It's an emoji-based build system that we're building. We're not open sourcing this yet because the code quality is so bad, but it's going to be good at some point. And it's turned out that using emoji to communicate with your build system is fun. So the rocket, it's funny here when we're at Rocket Internet, the rocket is how you build something. And I added the white check mark to say, I only want to build once I want to push once the tests are green. So that's what the bot is telling me. You're waiting to push on green. So we're getting towards the end here, and this is like some very obvious high-level cheat sheet things I added. So of course you're measuring to know your quality. That's kind of, you need to start with the end of that. That's why I think walking backwards to this is important. Runtime configuration has been super helpful to us. We've avoided shipping hotfixes just because we had feature flags, so we could just turn off a feature when it didn't perform in the field. Release often, release small, release with ease. Like releasing has to be boring, and no drama should be involved in releasing the app. We used to have a lot of drama because we shipped only once a month, and some feature was broken or late, and we had to push things out until next month. Today, people don't really talk about the releases much because they just happen, and they're like automated. And finding the right testing structure. We use UI automation tests, we use unit tests, we use manual testing, we use alpha and beta tests. We have something that works for us. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think both the tools and how we use them should be re-investigated regularly to see if there's better state of the art. As I said, building everything all the time, super helpful because that just enables all of these things. And one thing I was mentioning at the end here is use tools to enforce behavior. One thing we found that was super important is using the linter. So linting things and putting stuff in a linter is great because engineers love to argue about things, but you can't argue with a tool. So that's great. Put stuff in your linters. So that's kind of all I had to say about this. Actually, no, I have a lot to say about this, but I don't really have more time. So I guess we have time for a few questions.
So you mentioned that you have kind of a 3-week lag from your nightly alphas to publishing to the App Store. What's your frequency for publishing to App Store and for Google Play Store?
So that's every week. So once we get to release candidate, and then we ship it to the next week to the store, unless it's broken, but that's quite rare. Like almost no build makes it all the way there without shipping.
How many expedited reviews this year already?
So Apple has gotten so much better. I don't know that we've done any this year, apart from maybe the ones around the integration with Siri and stuff like that. Because the average review time today is down to like 48 hours or even 24. A year ago, we expedited maybe 1 or 2 every quarter of the year, so yeah.
I have 2 questions. One is, you said over the course of 3 years you invested most of your time to that. How much of your resources did you actually dedicate to get where you are right now? And the second one is, how many, even now with a team of 40, how many are really on product, and how much do you have of a support team, so to say, to get to all this automation and to make this work?
So by today, we have actually merged the mobile release function with the server-side release function and the web. So that's just one team working on releases, and there may be 10 people, maybe a bit more. So in the beginning, it was really just I was the only person working on the scripts and making the builds work, apart from doing hiring. I was basically hiring the team and building this at the same time. But so overall, there's definitely man years that have gone into this, but it's not that many. What do you mean? Which share of?
Overall capacity?
Oh, the share. I mean, I think we've spent maybe 20% of the capacity, 10 to 20%. It's not. You shouldn't be spending the majority of your time on the builds. The tools are good today. I think it should be even easier today.
Hey, you mentioned you got 5 apps. Are they all in the App Store? And if so, how do you force, say, nightly builds users to upgrade?
Yeah, so they're not all in the App Store. For the Play Store, we have the alphas and betas in there because you can do that, but they're only released to restricted groups. For Apple iPhone, we use Test Flight for pushing out everything but the production app.
Do you force upgrades?
Do we force upgrade? Yes, we have a force upgrade feature that we had used. We don't like using it because users don't like it, and we have a so it's a business decision we have to make to force upgrade people.
Anyone? A question from me. How do you combine app and web teams? Are they, if they're working on the same features, are they sitting together? How do you do it?
So we structure the company in feature teams. So there are, a lot of teams do have iOS, Android, web people working together because we have some features that span across everything. I think we're interested in looking at modern web technologies like React Native and things like that to see if we can use web technologies in the apps. I have a feeling that that's where the industry is going to go eventually. I don't think we're using it quite yet.
But you don't have like all the iOS guys sitting together, but they're spread across feature teams.
They work on feature teams. We don't have an iOS team or an Android team. We don't really think in terms of platform. Yeah. And in fact, the apps on iOS and Android are always in lockstep and almost identical visually. The design language of the platforms have gotten so much closer that you can actually build an app that looks pretty native on both iOS and Androids with very small differences between them.
And you, as head of mobile, you somehow roam between the team and make sure everything fits together? Or?
So I actually don't have that role anymore. I left that team to work on self-driving cars instead, mostly because it's actually kind of working now, and mobile as a thing is not a separate thing anymore. As I said, the release function has merged with the server release function. There's no separate product management. It's just a thing we do. And I think that's a big change that's coming in mobile. Like mobile is not so special anymore.
I fully agree. I think we all started also at Rocket by, okay, we have to do mobile, let's do a mobile team. Let's, first actually many companies, let's find an agency. And then, okay, maybe it's getting more important, let's do it on our own, but it's still a mobile team. We even had a mobile CTO, it was very separate function. And later we merged it all together and it's not so special anymore. It's the majority for most of us. Yeah.
Right, and even the app, what an app is, I think has changed because now, especially on iOS, where the app contains a watch app, an Apple Maps integration, has Siri integration. On both iOS and Android, we have Google Maps integration. We have an Amazon Alexa app. Like, what the app thing means, it's not just an icon anymore. It's a whole suite of technologies that you enable your consumer to use.
Questions? Question to the audience. How many of us have more than 50% traffic on mobile? Okay. Wow, almost everyone now. That's big.
I think we have 100% of our business on mobile.
So we as CTOs, we all need to know mobile. At Rocket we did a mobile hackathon, which was nice, where we basically paired web developers with app developers, and they all each had as pairs to build in one day one app. Then we made a shootout who built the best app, then just helped to also spread the mobile knowledge more on the backend teams. And
we've actually successfully trained quite a few web developers to work on iOS and Android. And that's been a great success. And the tools today are becoming more similar as well. So,
cool. If there are no more questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.